The sharp sound of footsteps echoed down the hospital corridor. Sterile walls, bright lights, and the smell of disinfectant filled the air. But tonight, the place meant for healing became a stage for humiliation. Dr. Michael Harris, renowned, respected, and dressed in his white coat, stood frozen as two security guards cornered him near the nurses' station. Their voices were sharp, their eyes cold. They didn't see a doctor, they saw a suspect. Patients watched in stunned silence. A black man in his own hospital, accused of trespassing. His badge ignored, his words dismissed. Each second felt like a lifetime, each glare like a blade. And then one voice broke the silence. A patient who knew the truth. This wasn't a stranger. This was their doctor. Under the fluorescent glow of the hospital ceiling, another night shift began. The hospital was alive, humming like a restless machine. Monitors beeped. Shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Phones rang at the nurses' stations in sharp, unrelenting bursts. This was the world that Dr. Michael Harris knew intimately, the world he had devoted his life to. For him, the hospital was not just a place of work, it was a battlefield of compassion, a stage where his knowledge and resolve saved lives. Dr. Harris had spent 15 years in medicine. His reputation was one of calm under pressure, the kind of doctor patients trusted when their lives hung by a thread. He carried himself with quiet dignity, a presence that spoke of competence and care. But beneath that calm exterior lived the weight of unspoken truths. Michael had learned early in his career that no matter how sharp his mind, or how white his coat, there were those who would see only the color of his skin. On this particular night, the hospital corridors were heavy with tension. A flu outbreak had swept through the city, flooding the emergency rooms with patients. Families huddled in waiting areas, whispering prayers, clutching coats, holding on to hope. Nurses moved like clockwork, pushing carts of supplies, wheeling patients from one ward to another. And through the chaos walked Dr. Harris, his stethoscope slung around his neck, his ID badge clipped neatly to his chest. His stride was steady, his eyes scanning charts, his mind cataloging symptoms and solutions. But even in this familiar environment, small cracks revealed themselves. A new security guard eyed him suspiciously as he passed, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. The guard's hand rested near his radio, fingers twitching as though expecting trouble. Michael offered a polite nod, but it was not returned. The gesture dissolved into the sterile air like smoke. At the nurse's station, whispers followed him. Two interns, fresh out of medical school, exchanged uncertain glances. One of them muttered, "Are you sure he's a doctor here?" The other shrugged, eyes darting to Michael's white coat, then back to the floor. He heard it, every word, but chose silence. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last. Racism, he had come to understand, was not always shouted. Sometimes it was whispered. Sometimes it was a look that lingered too long, a question asked with doubt instead of curiosity, a smile withheld when freely given to others. Michael carried these moments like invisible scars, pressed deep beneath his skin, hidden beneath professionalism and pride. Still he pressed on. In room 3112, an elderly woman struggled with pneumonia. Michael adjusted her oxygen levels, speaking softly to reassure her. She reached out, squeezing his hand with surprising strength. "You saved my son years ago?" she whispered. Her words were a reminder, a small light against the shadows that seemed to follow him. In room 405, a young boy whimpered through the pain of appendicitis. Michael leaned over, his voice gentle but firm, promising relief was on its way. The boy's parents, exhausted and afraid, clung to his words like lifelines. To them, Harris was not a suspect, he was salvation in a white coat. And yet, the unease grew. At every corner of the hospital, eyes seemed to follow him, not with the gratitude of patients, but with suspicion from those who should have been his colleagues. A janitor stopped mid-step, frowning, as though surprised to see him walking freely. A receptionist's smile faltered the moment their eyes met. It was subtle, yes, but unmistakable. Michael felt it pressing down on him, invisible hands trying to cage him in. The beginning of the night shift was always difficult, but tonight the air carried something heavier. The storm was coming, though he didn't yet know how close it was. As he turned down the hallway toward the intensive care unit, a voice cut through the air, sharp, unyielding. "Excuse me, sir. Can I see your identification?" Michael froze. It was the same guard from earlier, the one who had studied him like a puzzle. The man's stance was rigid, one hand resting on his belt, eyes narrowed. "I work here?" Michael replied evenly, gesturing to his ID badge clipped to his chest. His tone was calm, controlled, the kind of voice years of facing emergencies without panic. But the guard didn't glance at the badge. Instead, suspicion deepened in his eyes. "I'll need you to step aside? Hospital staff only are allowed in this area?" Michael's lips parted, disbelief flickering across his face. "I am staff. I'm Dr. Harris. I've worked in this hospital for over a decade." Still, the guard's gaze was unyielding. Around them, nurses slowed their steps, watching but saying nothing. Silence thickened the hallway like fog. This was how it began. Not with sirens or shouting, but with a single question asked in the wrong tone. A question that dripped with doubt, a question that reduced years of sacrifice, education, and healing into a challenge of belonging. Dr. Harris stood there, heart steady but heavy, as the world around him shifted. What should have been another ordinary night of saving lives was transforming into something else, something darker. Because in this hospital, the place where he had given his life's work, he was no longer seen as the healer. He was seen as the intruder. And though he didn't yet know it, this night would force the truth into the open. It would expose not just the prejudice of one man, but the complicity of silence all around him. It would test the loyalty of colleagues, the courage of patients, and the strength of his own dignity. The storm had arrived, and Dr. Michael Harris was standing at its center. The silence after the guards demanded to the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, the hospital didn't sound like a hospital anymore. The steady rhythm of machines, the murmurs of families, the shuffle of hurried nurses, all of it faded into the background. What remained was a spotlight, invisible yet searing, cast on Dr. Michael Harris. He had lived with suspicion before, at airports, in department stores, on quiet suburban streets when neighbors mistook him for someone who didn't belong. But here, in his own hospital, the insult cut deeper than any before. Michael lifted his badge again, firm this time, holding it so close the guard couldn't ignore it. "Read it?" he said evenly. His voice didn't tremble, but his patience frayed. The guard didn't look. Instead, he clicked his radio. "Control, I've got an individual in unauthorized access. Requesting backup." Burned, unauthorized, individual. Not doctor. Not colleague. Not man. Just suspect. Across the hall, a nurse named Clara hesitated, her face conflicted. She had worked beside Dr. Harris for years. She had seen him save lives with calm precision, seen him comfort families in the darkest moments. Yet in this moment, she said nothing. Her silence was a wound deeper than the guard's words. Another guard arrived, heavier built, eyes already narrowed. He positioned himself on the other side, boxing Michael in. "Sir, we'll need you to come with us." The corridor grew crowded. Interns whispered. A patient's daughter peeked out of a doorway, eyes wide, hand clutched over her mouth. People didn't need all the details. They could feel the accusation hanging in the air. Michael kept his voice level. "I am Dr. Harris. This is my hospital. My patients are waiting for me. If you remove me from this ward, you endanger their lives." But his reason was met with dismissal. The first guard scoffed. "Well, let admin sort that out." Another gate. Another delay. Another insult. The escalation had begun. What started as suspicion was now spectacle. The whispers spread like cracks through glass. Is he really a doctor? Why would security stop him if he was? Doubt poisoned the air, and prejudice disguised itself as procedure. Michael's heart beat steady, but his mind raced. He thought of the patient upstairs who needed his immediate care. He thought of the oath he had sworn, the countless nights he had worked, the respect he had earned. All of it meant nothing under the weight of skin and assumption. And then, the inevitable humiliation, the guard's hand on his arm. Firm. Unyielding. A gesture not of guidance but of restraint. The corridor gasped. A black doctor in a white coat, treated like a criminal in his own hospital. Michael pulled back, his voice sharp now, edged with fire. Do not touch me. You are interfering with my duties as a physician. But the guards didn't falter. Sir, comply, or we will escort you by force? The words rang out like a verdict. The world around him blurred, faces staring, eyes judging, silence accusing. In those moments, Michael wasn't a doctor, wasn't a man with decades of training. He was reduced to what they chose to see: black, male, suspect. Every instinct told him to fight, to resist, to shout the truth so loudly the walls themselves would shake. But another instinct held him back: dignity. The knowledge that one wrong move, one gesture too sharp, and he would be branded forever. Aggressive, dangerous. Exactly what they wanted him to be. So he stood still, not because he was powerless, but because he knew the power of restraint. His silence wasn't submission, it was survival. Yet survival came at a cost. In the corner, a patient's family whispered louder now. I thought he was my mother's doctor. Maybe not, maybe he snuck in. Their fear wasn't for Michael's safety, it was of him. Fear fed by the spectacle before them, fear dressed in the uniform of security. The humiliation dug deeper. Then came the moment that broke him. A child's voice, small, innocent, from the doorway of room 405, the boy with appendicitis. Why are they arresting Dr. Harris? He's my doctor. He promised he would help me. The hallway froze. Words hung suspended in the air. For a heartbeat, everything stopped. Guards, nurses, whispers. A child's voice had cracked the spell of prejudice. But the guards pressed on, ignoring the truth that now echoed between the walls. Michael's jaw tightened. He knew what was happening was bigger than one night. Bigger than one man. This wasn't just about him. It was about every patient who would lose their healer to bias, every colleague whose silence became complicity, every black professional who walked through the world carrying both skill and suspicion. He realized the storm was no longer approaching. It was here, and its force was determined to strip of his dignity, his authority, his humanity. The escalation had reached its peak. And soon, something, or someone, would have to break. The grip on Dr. Harris's arm tightened, and with it, the last shred of patience in his chest began to fray. He had endured slights before. The stares in the hospital cafeteria when he sat alone in his scrubs. The occasional, "Are you sure you're the doctor?" from families who expected someone different. The whispered questions about his qualifications, though his degrees hung framed on office walls. But this, being restrained in his own hospital, under the gaze of colleagues and patients, this was a wound carved deeper than all the others combined. The breaking point was here. Michael inhaled slowly, steadying himself, but every breath was heavy with anger. "You are obstructing medical care," he told the guards, voice like a blade. "A patient is waiting for me. Every second you waste here risks their life." The heavier guard smirked, as though Michael's words were nothing more than noise. "If you're really a doctor, admin will confirm it. Until then, you're coming with us." Something inside Michael snapped, not recklessly, but deliberately. He had spent his life mastering restraint, swallowing indignities in the name of professionalism. But now restraint had a cost: the lives of his patients, the erosion of his own humanity, the validation of their prejudice. Silence was no longer survival. Silence was complicity. He raised his voice, not in anger, but in power. His words carried through the corridor, reverberating off sterile walls. "My name is Dr. Michael Harris. I have worked in this hospital for 15 years. I have performed surgeries, delivered children, and saved countless lives here. And tonight, in front of staff and patients, I am being treated not as a doctor, not as a man, but as a criminal, because of the color of my skin." The hall fell into absolute silence. Nurses froze mid-step. Families clutched their loved ones closer. Even the guards hesitated, as though his words had briefly pierced their armor. But Michael didn't stop. His voice rose with the conviction of every wound he had ever carried. "You want to see my credentials? Ask the patients whose lives I've saved. Ask the families who trusted me when the night seemed darkest. Ask the children who are alive today because I was here, in this hospital, doing my job." His words thundered against the silence. The guards exchanged uneasy glances, but still they didn't release him. Their authority was crumbling, yet pride held them rigid. And then it happened. The very moment that turned a personal humiliation into a public reckoning. From room 312, the elderly woman with pneumonia shuffled to the doorway, her oxygen tube trailing behind her. Her voice, cracked but resolute, cut through the tension. "That man is my doctor. He saved my son years ago. You have no right to treat him this way." Her words sparked others. A ripple became a tide. From another room, a patient's daughter cried out, "That's Dr. Harris! He treated my mother last month when no one else would listen." A chorus followed. The boy with appendicitis stepped forward, clutching his IV pole, his small voice trembling but clear. "He promised he'd help me. Why are you taking him away?" The hallway transformed. What was once silent complicity became open defiance. Patients, families, voices rising one after another, weaving a shield around Michael. Their truth was undeniable, their loyalty unshakable. The guards faltered. Their grip loosened. Their authority wavered under the weight of so many witnesses, so many voices united. Michael stood taller, not because he was free, but because he was no longer alone. The breaking point had come, and with it, a choice: to shrink under the weight of prejudice, or to rise with the strength of those who believed in him. And he chose to rise. For the first time that night, the storm shifted. No longer was it him against the world. It was him, and his patience, against injustice itself. The battle was no longer just about identity. It was about truth, and truth, once spoken, could not be silenced. The aftermath of defiance was chaos. The sterile order of the hospital fractured, replaced by tension so sharp it could be felt in the bones of everyone who stood in that hallway. The guards, red-faced and rigid, tried to regain control. Their radios buzzed with static, their hands hovered over cuffs they no longer had the confidence to use. The air was electric, vibrating with anger, fear, and something more dangerous: truth that refused to be buried. Dr. Harris stood at the center, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. Outwardly calm, but inside, his heart thundered. He had not chosen this fight, yet here he was, dragged into it by suspicion, stripped of dignity in the very place he had dedicated his life to healing. And now the consequences of standing firm, of refusing to shrink, unfolded before him. The first consequence was isolation. From the edge of the crowd his colleagues lingered. Some nurses shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Michael and the guards. A few doctors whispered in hushed tones, unwilling to intervene, unwilling to defend. Their silence screamed louder than the guards' accusations. These were men and women he had worked alongside for years, shared late-night shifts with, celebrated successful surgeries with. Yet now, they hesitated, as though his struggle was not theirs. That betrayal cut deeper than the guards' hands ever could. Prejudice thrived not only in the actions of aggressors, but in the silence of bystanders. The second consequence was humiliation. The hospital, his sanctuary, had become a stage. Patients he had comforted, families he had guided through grief, now watched him stand accused. Their gratitude battled against their doubt, their trust against the spectacle. To them, the healer was now forced to defend his right to belong. His white coat, once a symbol of authority, was no shield. Under their gaze, it became a costume fragile, ready to be stripped away. And the third consequence was danger. The guards weren't backing down. Their pride was at stake. To admit they were wrong would mean admitting they had profiled him, admitting they had allowed racism to dictate their judgment. That truth was heavier than their egos could carry. So instead, they doubled down, "Sir, you're disrupting operations?" one guard barked, as though the cries of patients defending him were mere noise. "We'll have you removed by force if necessary." The words rippled through the hallway like a threat, sharp and reckless. Michael's voice was low but firm. "If you touch me again, if you drag me from this ward, know this: you are dragging away a doctor from his patients. You are endangering lives, and every witness here will know why." It wasn't anger that gave his words power. It was truth. Cold, undeniable, devastating truth. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, voices rose again, not whispers this time but shouts. A patient's son demanded, "Let him go! That's my mother's doctor!" Another woman, clutching her husband's arm, cried, "He's the only reason we're still here. He saved him last year." The guards looked around, realizing they were no longer facing one man, but a wave of humanity. Patients stood in doorways, some leaning on walkers, some with IV poles, some pale from illness but fueled by conviction. Their bodies were fragile, but their voices were unyielding. The hospital administration finally arrived, summoned by the chaos. A woman in a gray suit pushed through the crowd, her expression pinched with irritation. "What is going on here?" she demanded. The guards rushed to explain, painting Michael as the problem. But before they could finish, the chorus of patients cut through. Voices overlapping, stories spilling out. "He's my doctor! You treated my child! You can't take him away!" The administrator's eyes shifted to Michael, who stood tall despite the humiliation pressing on him. His ID badge gleamed under the harsh fluorescent light, undeniable proof that had been ignored all along. Her voice wavered, softer now. "Dr. Harris, is this true? You were detained." The question stung. Even now, with patients defending him, she questioned his legitimacy. Even now, she asked if the humiliation he endured was real. But Michael met her gaze, unflinching. "Yes, I was treated like a criminal in my own hospital. My badge was ignored. My words were dismissed. My dignity was stripped away in front of my patients. And all of it happened because of how I look." The words landed heavy, undeniable. The crowd held its breath. The guards shifted uneasily, their confidence eroding. The administrator's face flushed with discomfort, realizing the weight of the scandal pressing against her hospital's walls. And yet, even as vindication hovered in the air, Michael felt the deeper consequence. This was not victory. This was exposure. His pain, his humiliation, his truth, all laid bare before those he had sworn to protect. The storm had not passed. It had only revealed the cracks in the foundation. The patients' voices had saved him in that moment. But the question that now hung in the air was darker, sharper, unavoidable. If not for them, would his truth have ever mattered? The hallway that had moments ago been a battlefield of accusation and defense now simmered in uneasy quiet. The guards had stepped back, their authority stripped not by policy, but by the voices of the very people they thought invisible. The administrator's lips were pursed, her silence louder than any defense she might have offered. Around them, patients leaned on doorframes, some pale and frail, some clutching their IV poles, but all standing together, not as medical cases, but as witnesses. Dr. Michael Harris stood at the center, his body still, his dignity reclaimed piece by piece through the courage of those who spoke for him. He had not asked for this uprising, yet it had become his shield. And in that shield, there was something more powerful than justice. It was recognition. For years, Michael had carried the weight of suspicion in silence. He had endured the polite doubts, the stares, the unspoken questions. But tonight, that silence was shattered. His patients had chosen to speak when his colleagues would not. They had chosen to see him not as the world demanded, a suspect, an outsider, but as who he truly was, their doctor, their healer, their protector. The administrator finally broke the silence. Her voice was low, forced, betraying her discomfort. "Dr. Harris, we will be conducting a full review of this incident." Michael's reply was calm, but his eyes burned with fire. "A review will not erase what happened here. It will not erase the fact that in my own hospital, my credentials were meaningless against the color of my skin. What matters is not your review. What matters is whether you'll listen to the people who stood up tonight when it counted. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Patients nodded, voices rising once again in solidarity. We trust him. He's our doctor. This hospital needs him more than he needs it. The guards, humiliated, stepped aside, their authority dissolved, their radios silent, and in their retreat, Michael saw what power truly was. Not the uniform, not the badge, not the institution. Power was the collective voice of truth, spoken by those who refused to remain silent. Michael turned, not to the administrator, not to the guards, but to his patients. He bowed his head slightly, gratitude etched into his every word. You reminded me tonight that silence protects no one. You spoke when I was forced to defend myself. You gave me back my voice. The boy with appendicitis smiled weakly, his small voice carrying farther than any shout. You kept your promise, Dr. Harris? You didn't leave me? The words struck deeper than any accusation could. In that fragile voice was the essence of Michael's purpose. Not prestige, not titles, not recognition, but the bond between healer and healed, between human and human. The storm had passed, but its lesson remained. For Michael, the night was more than humiliation, it was revelation. He had been forced to see the cracks in his sanctuary, the complicity of silence from those who should have stood by him. But he had also witnessed the strength of unity, the raw, unpolished courage of patients who had nothing to gain but truth itself. That truth would not be forgotten. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond the hospital walls. Patients told their families. Families told their communities. The incident became a mirror, forcing the hospital and the city to confront uncomfortable questions. How many times had voices been ignored because no one spoke up? How many professionals of color had been stripped of dignity in silence? Michael did not ask for recognition. He did not seek apology. What he wanted was something far greater: change. And change, he knew, begins when silence breaks. That night he walked back into the ward. Not escorted, not restrained. He walked as he always had, steady, deliberate, with lives waiting for his care. But this time, he carried more than a stethoscope and a badge. He carried the voices of those who had defended him, voices that refused to be silenced. And as he checked on his patients, as he leaned over bedsides and offered reassurance, one truth resonated through the walls of the hospital. He was never just one man fighting alone. Because when prejudice tried to strip him of his humanity, his patients reminded the world of his worth. And that truth was louder than any accusation, stronger than any silence, and brighter than any darkness that tried to contain it. In the end, what happened to Dr. Michael Harris was not just about one night, one confrontation, or one humiliation. It was about what lies beneath the surface of our institutions, the quiet, corrosive power of prejudice, and the dangerous comfort of silence. Michael's story revealed a painful truth, that no badge, no degree, no title can shield a black man from being reduced to suspicion. But it also revealed something greater. That truth cannot be contained when voices rise together. That dignity, once denied, can be restored through solidarity. His patients did more than defend a doctor. They reminded the world that justice is not handed down from authority. It is spoken into existence by those who refuse to be silent. And as the echoes of their voices filled those sterile hospital halls, a lesson was carved into stone: silence protects systems, but voices change them. This was not just Dr. Harris's story. It is a mirror held up to all of us. A reminder of what happens when prejudice goes unchallenged, and what becomes possible when it is confronted. This is everyday racism drama.